In the summer of 356 BCE, under a sky that would soon witness the rise of an empire, a boy was born in Pella, the ancient capital of Macedonia. His name was Alexander, and even his birth was surrounded by omens and myths. The same night he was born, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, caught fire. Legend has it that the goddess Artemis was too busy attending Alexander's birth to save her own sanctuary. From the start, those around him whispered of destiny. Alexander was the son of 2 powerful and influential figures. His father, King Philip, too, was a fearsome general and visionary monarch who had transformed Macedonia into a dominant military force. Through cunning diplomacy and ruthless warfare, Philip had subdued the Greek city-states and forged a fragile unity. His mother, Queen Olympias, was a Molossian princess of Epirus, fiercely intelligent, deeply spiritual, and devoted to the worship of gods like Zeus and Dionysus. She often told Alexander that he was not the son of a mortal king, but of Zeus, himself, the king of gods. These stories were not just bedtime tales. They molded Alexander's psyche, planting in him a divine sense of purpose. His formal education began under Leonidas, a strict guardian who trained him in survival, discipline, and physical endurance. But it was Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the age, who ignited the fire of intellect in the young prince. For 3 years, Alexander studied under Aristotle in the sanctuary of Miessa, where he explored ethics, science, medicine, and metaphysics. He was captivated by Homer's Iliad and carried a copy annotated by Aristotle wherever he went. From Achilles he drew inspiration. From Aristotle he inherited rational thinking. The result was a rare combination, an emotionally driven visionary with sharp intellect and military instincts. Even before ascending to the throne, Alexander was already making his mark as a battlefield commander. At 16 years old, when most boys were still training under mentors, Alexander was entrusted with governing Macedonia as regent, while King Philip led campaigns elsewhere. During this time, the Mede, a rebellious Thracian tribe near the northern border, rose in revolt. Rather than waiting for reinforcements, Alexander acted decisively. He led a swift military expedition, crushed the rebellion, captured their stronghold, and established a new Macedonian colony called Alexandropolis, named after himself. The message was clear. Even as a teenager, he was a force to be reckoned with. 2 years later, at the age of 18, Alexander would take part in one of the most pivotal battles in Greek history, the Battle of Chaeronea, 338 BCE. In this clash, King Philip led the Macedonian forces against an alliance of Athens and Thebes, determined to break free of Macedonian dominance. Alexander was given command of the left flank of the army, a position typically reserved for seasoned generals. When the battle turned critical, Alexander charged headlong into the elite Theban sacred band, breaking their ranks and turning the tide of war. His courage under fire and his grasp of battlefield tactics were unmatched for someone so young. This early experience forged Alexander into more than just a prince. It made him a military prodigy. He earned the unwavering loyalty of veteran soldiers and the awe of his enemies. Whispers began to circulate. Not only was he his father's heir, but possibly something greater. While Philip dreamed of conquering Persia, many began to believe that only Alexander could make such dreams a reality. In 336 BCE, Alexander's world changed forever. During a lavish celebration of his daughter's wedding in Aegae, King Philip II was assassinated, stabbed by his own bodyguard, Pausanias. Whispers of conspiracy swirled immediately, with some blaming Queen Olympias and others suspecting Persian interference. But amid the chaos, one truth became undeniable. Alexander, at just 20 years old, was now king of Macedonia. His youth and sudden rise did not come without challenge. Several Greek city-states saw the king's death as a sign of Macedonian weakness and plotted rebellion. Rival factions within his own court questioned his legitimacy, and foreign powers assumed Macedonia was vulnerable. But Alexander acted with the fury and precision of someone born for the moment. He executed every rival to the throne, including those with even the faintest claim. Even his cousin Amyntas IV, Technically, the rightful heir was put to death. His mother Olympias purged the palace of Philip's other wives and their children. Then Alexander turned his attention to Greece. He marched south with terrifying speed, first to Thessaly, then Thebes, Athens, and Corinth, asserting his authority, with both diplomacy and intimidation. In Corinth, he was officially appointed hegemon of the Hellenic League, giving him command of a unified Greek army. In this moment, he stood not just as king of Macedonia, but as the leader of all Greece. And with his father's greatest ambition still unfulfilled, Alexander vowed to do what no man had ever done: conquer the mighty Persian Empire. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, into Asia Minor with an army of roughly 40,000 men. Before stepping foot on Persian soil, he paused to visit the ancient site of Troy, paying tribute to his hero Achilles by placing a wreath at what was believed to be his tomb. It was more than a symbolic gesture. It was a declaration that he would step into the legacy of mythic greatness. The Persian Empire, ruled by Darius III, was the largest and wealthiest empire on earth at the time, stretching from Egypt to the Indus Valley. Alexander's crossing was not just a military campaign, it was a bold gamble by a young king seeking to challenge a centuries-old superpower. The first major confrontation came at the Battle of the Granicus River. Persian satraps, governors, lined the riverbanks with cavalry and infantry, expecting to halt the invasion before it could spread. Despite advice from his generals to wait, Alexander led a direct charge across the river. Fighting at the front lines, he was nearly killed, but managed to survive and claim a stunning victory. The Persian forces were shattered. After Granicus, Alexander didn't stop. He marched through Western Asia Minor, liberating Greek cities from Persian control, sometimes with force, other times with promises of autonomy. In Sardis, a Persian stronghold, he was welcomed without a fight. In Halicarnassus, he crushed resistance. Everywhere he went, he positioned himself not just as a conqueror, but as a liberator of Greek people under Persian rule. At just 22 years old, Alexander had taken his first steps into Asia, stood victorious over one of the Persian Empire's key defenses, and shown the world that his campaign would not be one of caution, but of lightning conquest. Alexander's next moves were nothing short of audacious. In 333 BCE, he advanced deeper into Persian territory and confronted King Darius III himself at the Battle of Issus near modern-day Syria. Darius had assembled an enormous army, estimated at over 100,000 soldiers, to face the young Macedonian king. The odds were stacked against Alexander, whose forces were vastly outnumbered. But numerical superiority could not match the genius of his battlefield tactics. At Issus, Alexander led a dramatic cavalry charge straight through the Persian center, personally targeting Darius. As he closed in, the great king lost his nerve and fled the battlefield, leaving behind his royal family, including his mother, wife, and daughters. Rather than treating them as hostages, Alexander honored them with dignity and respect, a move that further elevated his image, not only as a warrior king, but also as a man of culture and mercy. This victory shook the Persian Empire to its core. It was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological blow to Darius's legitimacy. Alexander began to portray himself as the rightful ruler of Asia. Coins were minted with his image, statues erected in his honor. He now moved southward to secure the eastern Mediterranean coast, defeating cities like Tyre and Gaza, both of which resisted and were brutally subdued. In 332 BCE, he entered Egypt, where he was greeted not as a conqueror, but as a liberator from Persian rule. The Egyptian priests even crowned him a son of Amun, equating him with a god. There he founded the city of Alexandria, destined to become a center of knowledge and commerce for centuries. With the Mediterranean secured and Egypt under his rule, Alexander prepared for the final showdown. He would now go after the Persian heartland. In 331 BCE, the climactic moment came at the Battle of Gaugamela, near modern-day Iraq. Darius had regrouped and gathered perhaps his largest army yet, including scythed chariots and Indian war elephants. Alexander's own generals were anxious, Some even suggested retreat or waiting for reinforcements. But Alexander, with supreme confidence, launched one of the most brilliant tactical maneuvers in military history. He led a flanking movement that stretched the Persian line, creating a gap through which his elite companion cavalry charged. Once again, Alexander targeted Darius directly, and once again, Darius fled in panic, his royal standard abandoned on the field. The battle ended in a crushing Macedonian victory. The Persian Empire, for centuries the dominant power of the ancient world, collapsed. Alexander entered Babylon as a hero. Then he moved on to Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana, taking each ancient capital and seizing unimaginable wealth. In Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia, he allowed his men to plunder for a day, and then, possibly in drunken revenge for the Persian burning of Athens a century earlier, he set fire to the city's palaces, symbolically ending the Achaemenid Empire. At just 25 years old, Alexander ruled over an empire that stretched from Greece to Egypt and as far east as the Hindu Kush. His authority extended across thousands of miles, and he adopted Persian customs and dress to unify his diverse subjects. He began marrying noblewomen from conquered regions and encouraged his men to do the same, envisioning a fusion of East and West. The kid, who had once crossed the Hellespont with a small army, was now an emperor, a god in the eyes of many, and the most powerful man on earth. Even after conquering the Persian Empire, Alexander's ambition remained unquenched. He had grown restless in the opulent halls of Babylon and Persepolis. To him, these victories were mere stepping stones to an even grander vision, a world empire stretching from the west to the edges of the known earth. And so, in 327 BCE, he turned his gaze toward India, a mysterious land filled with fabled riches and unknown rulers. Crossing the treacherous Hindu Kush mountains, Alexander led his army into the Indian subcontinent. There, he encountered fierce resistance, including from King Porus, a formidable local ruler who commanded a large army and even war elephants, which the Macedonians had never faced before. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, 326 BCE, Alexander executed one of his most difficult and brilliant tactical victories. Despite the river's flooding and the intimidating Indian war elephants, Alexander outflanked Porus, captured him, and, impressed by his courage, reinstated him as a client king with greater territory. But the brutal campaign in India came at a cost. The weather was unforgiving, the terrain unfamiliar, and the army exhausted. After years of constant war, Alexander's men, once fiercely loyal, mutinied at the banks of the Hyphasis River, refusing to march farther east. They had reached the limits of the known world. For the first time in his career, Alexander had to yield. With a heavy heart, he agreed to turn back. The return journey was harrowing. Instead of retracing his steps, Alexander chose to explore the Gedrosian Desert, modern-day southern Iran, and Pakistan. The choice proved catastrophic. Thousands of soldiers perished from heat, thirst, and starvation. Still, Alexander pressed on, more determined than ever to transform his empire from a military conquest into a cultural revolution. In 323 BCE, Alexander arrived in Babylon, where he began drafting ambitious plans for the future. New cities, a massive east-west fusion of cultures, a global army, and even an expedition to Arabia. But before these dreams could materialize, tragedy struck. In June of that year, after a grand banquet and days of fever, Alexander suddenly fell gravely ill. Despite the best efforts of his physicians, the 32-year-old emperor, still in his prime, died after nearly 2 weeks of suffering. The cause of death remains a mystery to this day. Some believe it was malaria or typhoid fever. Others suggest poisoning. No definitive answer has ever been found. With no clear successor, his only son, Alexander IV, was born after his death. His empire fractured almost immediately. His most trusted generals, known as the Diadochi, divided his realm in a bloody power struggle that would last for decades. The dream of a unified world empire died with him. Though Alexander's life was brief, his impact was eternal. He founded over 20 cities, many of which still exist today. none more famous than Alexandria in Egypt, a hub of learning and culture for centuries. He spread Greek language, architecture, philosophy, and governance across 3 continents, blending them with Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions. This Hellenistic culture would dominate the ancient world long after his death, influencing Rome, Byzantium, and even modern Western civilization. He was seen not just as a conqueror, but as a mythic hero. To some, he was a god. To others, a philosopher king. Even centuries later, military commanders like Napoleon Caesar and Douglas MacArthur studied and emulated his tactics. Few individuals in history have altered the world so profoundly by the sheer force of personality and will. From a teenage prince leading his first army to a world conqueror at 25, Alexander proved that greatness could be seized, not inherited. In the end, the kid who ruled 1/3 of the known world left behind not just an empire, but a legacy that would echo through time.